Saturday, June 23rd, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I'm going to talk about OPEC and the Bank for International Settlements. And you might say, what's the connection, Mario? Well, it's a huge connection. They're both cartels. And of course, we've heard that OPEC is an oil cartel, but we never heard that the BIS is a banking cartel. Why? Well, because the people who run the BIS, who are the central banks, the powers that be, the globalists, they control the media. And that's why I'm doing these videos here, because there's no difference. OPEC tries to control the price of oil through the supply and demand of oil. And the BIS, they try to control the price of money through manipulation, basically. They don't even, and also supply of fiat money. And what do I mean by the manipulation? Well, the real money really is gold and silver. The BIS, up until a few years ago, their currency was gold, actually, believe it or not. It's not anymore. So, and how do they manipulate the price of gold? Well, they even say here on their About BIS overview on their website, acting as prime counterparty for central banks in their financial transactions. So the BIS is above the law. It was established in 1930 by an international treaty at The Hague. And it's actually part of the UN, and it has observer status, I think. And it's a supranational, it's like a country. It is based in Basel, Switzerland, but the Swiss government or the local Basel government, they have no authority or no sovereignty over the BIS. The directors of the BIS, who are these guys here, you can probably recognize him, Jens Weidmann, he's the head of the Bundesbank, Mark Carney, head of the Bank of England, John Cunliffe, part of the Bank of England, Mario Draghi, president of the ECB. All these people have diplomatic passports from the BIS. So when they travel there for their bi-monthly meetings, they can take whatever they want on the plane. They don't have to go through customs. And basically they're above the law. Of course, they publish loads of stuff, and on their website, they look really transparent, but deep down, they're not the things that they do for the central banks. Do you think if you called the BIS in Basel and said, can you please show me the records of all the trades you've done for the Bank of England? Isn't the Bank of England supposed to be nationalized, owned by the public in the UK? We should be able to call the BIS and say, I want to see what my state bank, my central bank has done. Of course they wouldn't tell you. And OPEC, what about OPEC? Well, yeah, OPEC has gotten a lot of flack since the 1970s. That's when it was created. And it's the organization of oil producing and exporting countries. Saudi Arabia and is the main, how can I say, head of that group, because they're the biggest oil producer. OPEC has always been criticized a lot in the West. They're called an oil cartel. I saw a story, and that's one of the reasons why I'm talking about this today. And I got a story from aa.com.tr. It's from Turkey. I just Googled because I saw the story earlier and I wanted to find it. And I found this, and it's interesting. It says, and what's the date here? June 21st of June 2018. So a couple of days ago, U.S. Congress to pressure OPEC with Trump support. If signed into law, NOPEC Act would allow U.S. to sue OPEC for manipulating oil prices, damaging the American economy. It goes on to say legislation being debated in Congress could put pressure on OPEC if it is signed into law by President Donald Trump, who has long been critical of the cartel's practices. If the No Oil Producing and Exporting Cartels Act, or NOPEC, is signed into law, it would allow the U.S. to sue the cartel for manipulating crude prices and global oil markets that cause enormous damage for the American economy and consumers. Well, from what I remember a few years ago, because usually people see as a cartel as trying to keep prices up, right? I remember a few years ago, 2 years, oil dropped below 30 and the U.S. shale oil industry was in the dumps. A lot of U.S. banks were in trouble because they lent a lot of money to these energy companies, and people were clamoring for OPEC to stop, to cut back production. Now that oil is going up to like almost $70 now, they're all saying, oh no, OPEC is doing this and that, and it's just rubbish. Why doesn't the U.S. Congress go after the BIS? The BIS has been manipulating the price of fiat money for years now. And what do I mean by that? Well, they manipulate the price of gold and silver for their clients. Who are their clients? Well, Bank of England, the Federal Reserve. That's why when asked in Congress or in Parliament, if the central bankers are there, asked if they manipulate gold, if they do anything, they can lie. Well, they're not lying. Technically, they're right. They say, no, we don't do any activity in the gold market. No, we don't. And technically they don't, but the BIS does it for them. And how do they instruct the BIS? Well, they have these bi-monthly meetings. OPEC, I don't think they have as many meetings as the BIS. So bi-monthly meetings. And I read from their website. It's all, how can I say, hidden in plain sight. The only reason people don't look at it, the general public, is because the mainstream media is bought and paid for by these guys. So, they will not scratch the surface and ask the question. If you go on CNBC, for example, on a panel, and they're talking about OPEC, if you bring up the BIS, they look at you as if you're crazy. They'll probably won't ever ask you there again. Same thing for Bloomberg or even Fox Business, I would say. So it goes on to say the three principal bi-monthly meetings are the Global Economy Meeting, the Global Consultative Committee, and all governors meeting. Well, all governors, that means all the heads of the central banks. They meet 6 times a year. What do they have to talk about 6 times a year? Well, I'm sure they leave their instructions and their price targets for everything from ranging from gold and all the cross currencies, and the BIS will act upon it. If you ask for the records of their manipulations, the BIS even has an account on the CME. If you ask for their records, what they're doing in the futures market, they don't have to give it to you. Let's read a little more about these bi-monthly meetings. So they call it the GEM, General Economic Meeting. The GEM is chaired by Mark Carney. Oh, I see. Governor of the Bank of England. Okay, the Governor of the Bank of England, Chairman of the FSB, the Financial Stability Board. Well, that sounds really great, doesn't it? Financial Stability Board. But I'm going to put a link above in the cards to a great video that you need to listen to called All the Plenary's Men. And it's all about how the BIS covered up for HSBC and their nefarious activities of money laundering for drug cartels and helping finance terrorist organizations. You have to listen to this. It's 56 minutes long, but it goes to show what the BIS does through their FSB. The Financial Stability Board is just an arm of the BIS. They say it promotes stability in the global financial markets, but it doesn't. Listen to this video. I'll put a link below in the description as well. It's going to open your eyes to what the BIS really is. I would say OPEC is a good organization compared to the BIS. So there you go. And another book I recommend is The Tower of Basel, which is about the BIS. and the criminal nature of this institution, and the private nature, secretive nature of the institution. Yesterday, someone asked me one of the questions, Mario, when I tell my friends that the Bank of England is basically private, they go on to Wikipedia and say, oh look, it was nationalized in 1946. And he said, how can I convince them that it's not? And one way to tell them is that if the Bank of England was working for the public good of the people of the UK, they wouldn't have to, they could just do what the commercial banks that they are in charge of do. And what's that? Well, they could issue money out of thin air and give it to the government. What happens now, and why the Bank of England is not operating in the interest of the people, is that the government has to borrow from the Bank of England, you see. If the Bank of England was really nationalized and owned by the people of the UK, they could just issue the Bank of England notes interest-free and give it to the government. And you wouldn't have to pay a penny of tax. Why would you have to pay tax if the government can finance itself through its national bank? You wouldn't have to. Of course, who wants taxation? It's the bankers. Because what happens now is that they can issue money out of thin air, you know, Barclays, HSBC, RBS, to give you loans with interest, right? But they do the same thing for the government. You see, when the Bank of England does QE, they buy the debt from the government, print the money, but the government has to pay interest. If the Bank of England was really nationalized, the government wouldn't have to pay any interest. The Bank of England would just issue the notes, interest-free, just like the greenbacks during the Civil War, or even during World War I in the beginning. The UK Treasury issued Treasury notes called the Bradbury Pound in the beginning, and it helped finance World War I. And then the bankers realized, oh, we can't have that, and they stopped that right on its tracks. So another thing I'd like to point out is that a lot of people think they're not going to bail out the banks again. You know, they got bail-ins. They will never do what they did again in 2008. The taxpayer is not going to be put on the hook for it. But let me tell you, that's not true. So why is it not true? Well, Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, in a speech on the 21st of June at the Mansion House in the City of London, this is what he said. And I quote from his speech. It's on, I'll put the link to it as well. It's on page 3. And he says, an effective financial system is fair. Fair to end users and fair to the taxpayer, who provide the ultimate backstop to the system. So what is a backstop? Well, the backstop is the guarantee. So we're still guaranteeing this fraudulent system where they actually lend money to us that's guaranteed by us and charges interest. So there you go. The Bank of England is not, it's only nationalized in name, but it serves not the interest of the taxpayer. It serves the interest of the bankers, the commercial bankers, the private bankers. So there you have it. You probably won't hear about this on CNBC or Bloomberg. OPEC and the BIS. No difference. Both cartels, both monopolies, and hopefully people will wake up to that. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. If you'd like to make a donation as well to the channel, there's some links below in the description. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.